ITG 189. We are inching closer and closer to the Backyard Brawl. We're going to get Phil Steele's thoughts on that. A couple of games in the top 25 as well as the Big 12. Stay tuned. We'll have a little bit of breakdown on West Virginia Pitt, and then we'll have Phil coming in as well.
You are now watching Believe.
ITG.
With special guest, Phil Steele.
Author of the College Football Bible.
You can see things before they happen.
Well, I definitely like West Virginia's offensive line.
All you got to do is bet on the winner and you'll never lose.
I like the Mountaineers to win this one.
Taylor, touchdown!
To me, the key matchup here is that West Virginia run game. Hey, a real pleasure being on. Thanks for having me on the In the Gun podcast.
Because once you enter this family, there's no getting out.
All right, folks, it is time to recap our picks from last week, along with making our picks for this week's game against Pitt. But before we do, a thank you to BetOnline for presenting this episode of ITG. BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting needs. BetOnline, where the game starts, and also a shout out to Toothman Ford, where we all know cars cost less in Grafton. So, Jed, how did we do last week? I'm pretty sure I went 0 for in week one, so I'm praying to God I at least got one pick right, because I don't even remember what the questions were or what I predicted. So please tell me I didn't go 0 for a second straight week.
Well, this time it was my turn to go over.
Yeah.
Here are the Albany prop bets. We went West Virginia's tackles for loss over 8.5, over under 8.5. You took over. I went under. West Virginia finished with 9. You hit that one. And then we went West Virginia's yards per carry offensively. Over under 6.5. We both took the under. West Virginia, as we know, yards per carry 9.5, the most by a Mountaineer offense since the Tavon Austin Oklahoma game in 2012. So, which was 9.7 against Oklahoma, but we both missed that one. Over under combined first half points 45.5. You went under, I went over. It was 42, 28-14 at the half. You hit that one. And then WVU takeaways, forced turnovers, over under 2.5. You took under, I took over 0, which is once again something we have to remedy in this Backyard Brawl as we head north to face Pitt. Speaking of Pitt, the Backyard Brawl, here are this week's prop bets for the Backyard Brawl. Okay, let's go with a halftime over-under. Last year in Morgantown, actually 2 years ago, let's start with that. 2 years ago in Pittsburgh, it was 10-10 at halftime, followed by 49 second half points between the two teams. Last year in Morgantown, it was 7-6 West Virginia at halftime. Only 10 total second half points, all of which were scored, by West Virginia. Interestingly enough, Eli Holstein, through 2 games, the quarterback for Pitt, very much appears to be a second half player, far more productive in the second half than the first. This year, the total game over under out of Vegas for the Backyard Brawl, the total game is 63.5. I'm going to kind of split that in half and say second half over under. How many points will the two teams combine for in the second half? Over under 31.5.
That is a pretty large number, but this is not your typical Backyard Brawl in terms of it'll still be scrappy and it'll still be tough in the trenches, but with Pitt changing their style of offense, with West Virginia having so much back on offense and the struggles they had against Albany, I feel like I got to lean to the over. And I don't know. Initially, I thought this game would be played in the 20s. The more I studied it, the more I thought about it, I think this could be kind of like a 31-27 type of game. So I'll go with the over.
Sounds like you're taking the under for the game if you're saying 31-27.
Yeah.
See, I kind of feel differently for the game, but I probably feel the same for the half. I'm going to take the over because I would look at the over for the game. That over 63.5. there's going to be a lot of scoring. Is it just one of those funky games that's a shootout at halftime? Both teams make adjustments and settle down in the second half defensively, or is there an offensive burst in the second half? Like I said, 2 years ago in Pittsburgh, 49 combined points were scored in the second half. Of
Yeah.
course, part of that was that pick six, but I'm going to go over because I think it's going to be over for the game, which means it will probably be 7-6 at halftime again. But who knows? I do feel that there's going to be some offensive fireworks in this football game, and it'll be about trying to steal a couple possessions. If you can steal a turnover or two, if you can get a quick 3 and out at a critical point in the game, I'm going to go over. So it sounds like we're both over there, but I'm over for the game as well. All right, West Virginia's rushing. Let's go over under on that. As we know, CJ Donaldson, his first game as a college player, his first game as a college running back was against Pitt 2 years ago up there. 7 carries for 125 yards. Quite a debut. Last year, West Virginia grinded it out against Pitt. CJ kind of led the way with that 18 carries for 102. Pitt so far defensively this year against the rush, combination of Kent and Cincinnati, they've allowed 91 yards a game and 2.4 yards per carry. Jaheim so far this year, 18 carries, 133 yards, chunky yards per carry average again. Of course, Jaheim wasn't a factor, wasn't utilized in last year's brawl. Funny thing is, his first 100-yard career game came the week before the brawl against Duquesne, but didn't play against Pitt really. So let's go Jaheim White. He's kind of the X factor. We've seen CJ battle it out with these Panthers, and we know how critical it is for Narduzzi to try and corral CJ. Jaheim White, rush yards, over under 62.5.
You know what? I'm going to hammer the over here because I think he's going to have himself a day. And you talked about it. He didn't play in this game a year ago. Garrett Green really didn't play in this game a year ago. And CJ Donaldson, although he did play, I don't know how healthy he was at that point, but he had been battling some stuff all year long. And I think having a healthy CJ Donaldson, knocking on wood here, and having Garrett Green as well, that's going to open up things for all three of those guys. So I think Jaheim especially is going to have I think he's going to be the leading rusher in this game. He's got so much explosiveness to him. I think CJ is going to be able to wear them down in the first half. Second half, they're going to be tired, not going to be able to chase down Jaheim White. Every time he touches the ball, he's got a chance to do something special with it. So I'm going to hammer the over here.
I'm not going to hammer it, but I'm going to take it. I think all it's going to take with Jaheim is one missed fit by one of these Pitt blitzes, and that's going to give him an opportunity for a big play. This is interesting. Again, we've seen these two games the last 2 years, and we understand what CJ can be, and he's played such a prominent role in both these games. And here's Jaheim as their Batman and Robin. Well, last year it was just Batman, right? So this is really interesting. Jaheim is a just fundamentally different type of skill set, different type of back. Pitt hasn't been asked to contend with both of them, only CJ. I'm going to go, I don't know about way over, but I'm going to go over with Jaheim, over the 62.5 yards as well. So that's an interesting one to stay focused on. Let's switch sides of the ball. Pitt. Desmond Reed has been an offensive spark plug for them. He's their feature back. Rodney Hammond on the shelf, obviously. You wondered if there'd be a drop off when Pitt lost Rodney Hammond as their feature back. Well, there hasn't been. Desmond Reed transferred in. He came with new O coordinator Cade Bell from Western Carolina. Desmond Reed was an All-American FCS player at Western Carolina, highly productive there, and he has not missed a beat. He's settled right in. Through 2 games, he leads Power 4 in yards from scrimmage at 204. He leads the nation in all-purpose yards at 204 yards from scrimmage, 244 all-purpose yards. Now, again, let's define the terms. Yards from scrimmage is a combination of receiving and rushing. All-purpose yards, receiving, rushing, and return yards, because he has some splash plays in the return game as well. So think back to Nick Singleton from Penn State against West Virginia. He had 127 yards from scrimmage. 114 of that was rushing. West Virginia contained the UAlbany ground game last week, holding the Great Danes to 68 total yards as a team. Desmond Reed's a handful. What I want to look at is Desmond Reed's yards from scrimmage. Again, forget the returns. We're going to focus on rushing yards and receiving yards because they target him quite a bit in the pass game. Over under Desmond Reed's over under yards from scrimmage against West Virginia 138.
Oh, I'll say. We're just doing yards from scrimmage, right?
Yep, no return yards.
I'll say, man, that's a really tight number. I'm gonna go and put my faith in the under here, but I'm saying that with a little bit of hesitancy. Um, yeah, I mean, you're right. They get him involved heavily. I mean, he's really their only guy that they run the ball with. Eli Holstein is their second leading rusher, um, and he's only had a handful of carries. They like to target him in the pass game, but I'm going to go under. I think West Virginia knows going into this game they can't allow big plays for him to take off in the running game, and they're going to have an eye on him in the passing game as well. They're going to force other guys to beat them. Gavin Bartholomew is a guy that I'm going to be watching, the tight end. I think he's kind of underrated and could be somebody that West Virginia has fits with, but I'm going to go with the under here on him.
Okay, to make it interesting, I'll go over 138. We've agreed with the first two, so we have to diverge at some point. I'm going to go over. He's tough to find. I mean, he's one of those guys, much like Jaheim. He's Jaheim's size, but 20 pounds lighter. So he's a handful. The name Deuce Vaughn came up earlier this week from Jordan Leslie, and not necessarily a comp, but just giving you some indication of what it's like trying to defend this kid. And I think that's what kind of West Virginia is going to be dealt with. But I'm going to go slightly over. And who knows how this game unfolds? Again, you expect a lot of offensive production. I'd like to see West Virginia with a lead. Maybe he hits us with a couple draws, and that's part of the over. But yeah, I'm going to go over because he's averaging 204. You could argue far inferior competition with Kent as one of those two games.
Yeah.
But 138, yeah, I'll go with slightly over. Finally, let's close with this. Let's go with West Virginia defensive sacks against Pitt. Okay, against Penn State, we had none. Last week against Albany, we had two. We had 9 TFLs. 2 of them were sacks against Albany. Of course, as we know, last year, West Virginia led the Big 12 in sacks. So far, Pitt has allowed 6, which is second most in the ACC. Now, let's look at what we've done against Pitt. Last year in Morgantown, it was a weird game. We had 1 sack. It turned into a defensive rock fight with Garrett out. 2 years ago in Pittsburgh, more of an offensive battle. We had 5 sacks against Keaton Slovis. What I'm going to go with here is West Virginia's sack total against Pittsburgh, against Eli Holstein and that Pitt offense, over under 2.5 sacks for the West Virginia defense.
That's exactly where I thought you were going to put that. Dang it. I would say I'll lean over here. I know Eddie V not being there, that's obviously a hurt for West Virginia's D line, but I think TJ Jackson was in line to play more anyways. He's been really good through the first 2 weeks. I think he gets a sack this week. I think Sean Martin comes up with one, and I don't know where the other one's going to come from, but as you mentioned in the preview, Eli likes to hold on to the football, and that's going to allow for some opportunities to get him to the ground. So I think they can get to 3. I don't know how much more they can get after that, but I do think they can get over 2.5.
Yeah, it's interesting when you study him. 2 of those 6 sacks that Pitt has allowed have come against just 3-man rushes because he does hold on to the football. So you can actually get pressure on him because he gets a little greedy when you drop guys into coverage and he's looking for the perfect hole. You took the over. I'll take the under. I do think West Virginia is going to this week force a couple takeaways. So that's how we'll compensate with that. I think we'll have a couple sacks, but I don't know if we'll get to 3. So I'll take the under. We'll keep things interesting there. We do want to remind people, as we've done all week, when it comes to these picks, when it comes to the picks that you and me and Wes and Owen are making for our, signal caller of the week, beer truck of the week, go to our Twitter page. We have the tweet pinned. and you can pick against us and try and beat us. You can pick the Big 12 offense that'll score the most, defense that'll hold the opposition to the fewest, rush for the most, pass for the most. See if you can beat me and Skylar and Owen and Wes, and you can be part of this much like you were last year. Skylar was last week's winner. We'll see. I was the first week's winner. So I installed a new rule that benefited you where you get to block
I got the
one
ban
player
Owen.
of your choosing. You blocked Owen, and he had to pick a reserve offense for rushing. But so yeah, that's a new twist we put on it. But yeah, we encourage you to go to our Twitter page, check it out, and take part in the voting for our Big 12 picks of the week. But let's see how this shakes out. It's going to be a fun one. But I'm very eager to see what Mr. Phil Steele has
Oh
to
yeah.
say about this one and all the others, because he was pretty hot last week. He was cooking them.
Yes, he was. I'm excited. I've been waiting for this episode all week to get his thoughts on it, and always I get my notes written down for this because he is money when it comes to taking points on the spread, laying the points. So this is where I know what I'm going to be betting this weekend. So thank you,
right.
Phil, for that. But yeah, another quick thank you here to Fortis for roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. Be sure to visit fortis.us.com. Hang tight while we come back while Phil Steele on the line, breaking down the Brawl, Big 12, and Top 25 action in Week 3.
For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
Back in the gun here with Phil Steele, the man who was on a heater last weekend. And if you are thinking about putting in some wagers this weekend, you might want to have a listen to what this guy's going to say here in just a few seconds. Phil, thank you for coming back on this week. Anything you want to plug, go ahead and feel free to do so.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You know, I put out a weekly newsletter called Inside the Press Box, and that gives you selections on every single game, even the FBS versus FCS games. And this week you can get it for just $15. Type in the code word "the battle" and you'll be able to get it. But also up right now, you can get my Phil Steele tour with selections. You get a complete breakdown of the games with selections. I show you how to use Phil Steele Plus. Just go to philsteele.com and click on the daily blog there, and you'll be able to get that. But don't miss out on the place for this weekend.
Now we're going to jump right into some top 25 action. You were cooking last week. I mean, you were all over that upset that Illinois had and against Kansas. You were all over the Nebraska-Colorado game. You called Texas to cover against Michigan. So you were really throwing some heaters last week. So let's see if you can follow up. We're gonna start you off. Bama giving 16. At least that's the last that I saw. Heading to Wisconsin to take on the Badgers. I mean, you got. What's Jalen Milroe going to do in that type of environment against that defense? Luke Fickell, it's an opportunity for a signature win early in his tenure there. But is this just too much for the Badgers to take on, or do you expect a bit of a tussle here after you saw kind of a struggle last week against South Florida before Alabama was able to separate? What do you expect in Alabama-Wisconsin, Phil?
Yeah, I think we'll see a different Alabama team this week. Now, granted, they're off a misleading final. They didn't really win that thing 42-16. They scored 3 touchdowns in the last 5 minutes of the game to turn it into a blowout. It was a 21-16 game, but I like what I saw them in the opener. I do think they have an explosive offense. You're looking at Miller and Haynes at running back. Ryan Williams has been a revelation at wide receiver, the true freshman. And then, of course, Jalen Milroe at QB, and I love their defense as well. Wisconsin, I've sort of been nonplussed with this year. The Western Michigan game, they actually trailed 14-13 in the fourth quarter. The South Dakota game last week was a game that they were only up 17-13 late third quarter, ended up putting up a couple of touchdowns later in that to win by 14, but neither game was overwhelming. Tyler Van Dyke at QB is hitting 60% with a 1-0 ratio. I think Wisconsin will have a tough time keeping up with Bama. If Bama gets ahead, which I think they will, I look for Bama's defense to take over. So I just don't think Wisconsin could trade scores with Alabama. I'm going to actually lay the points with Alabama on the road here.
Let's head to Columbia, where College game day will be. It's LSU and South Carolina. South Carolina pretty much just beat down Kentucky last week. That's the second time in the last 5 games that they've beaten Kentucky going back to last year. LSU, they bounced back pretty easily last week after their loss to USC. I really like this Garrett Nussmeier kid, Phil. I think he's got a chance to be something pretty special. I don't know about South Carolina, though. I know it's just 2 games in, but they seem to be on the right track. Is there actually something there with this Gamecock team, and can they find a way to win this one at home against LSU?
Yeah, well, last week we called the upset with Illinois. I'm going to call an upset here with South Carolina.
Wow.
When you look at LSU last week against Nichols, that thing was actually 23-21 in the third quarter, and they gave up 295 yards to Nichols. Nichols the previous week only gained 200 yards, so LSU's defense still not completely fixed. I know they brought in Blake Baker at the defense coordinator. They've got talent there, but South Carolina does have the edge defensively, and I love their defensive front. They can get a lot of pressure on you, 5 sacks in each of their first 2 games. They've got Rocket Sanders at running back. Lenora Sellers getting better by the week. I think we're going to see that progression, and we saw it from week 1 to week 2, and I think we'll see it here in week 3. South Carolina is extremely tough at home, and they're getting a full touchdown here, but I don't think they're going to need any points. I'm going to call for South Carolina to win that one outright.
Good job. That's another one to stay dialed into. Again, if you saw what he did last week, pay attention to what he's saying this week. Interesting top 25 matchup with Boston College heading to Missouri. You've got a pair of 2-0 teams. Missouri so far has pitched shutouts against Murray State and Buffalo, haven't been scored on. Boston College head coach Bill O'Brien, of course, the big win over Florida State. They've only allowed 13 points. 13 points allowed combined between these 2 teams. You've got a heavy favorite on the SEC side of Missouri. The over-under, I think I saw it at like 53.5. That seemed a little high to me, Phil, but do you see points being at a premium in this one, Boston College at Missouri, or will something shake loose and a little scoring be done here?
Yeah, I mean, you've got 2 really good defenses, and my favorite play in this one is Boston College plus the points. I think Missouri deserves to be favored. They're at home. They're ranked, tough at home. But this Boston College team is really good. They got a lot of players back from last year. Castellanos is looking great at QB. He's hitting 73% with a 6-0 ratio. They got Trayshawn Ward. They got Robichaud at running back. And the defense, as you mentioned, is playing extremely well. I had Missouri favored something like 7 to 10 points. I was surprised it's over 2 touchdowns, all the way up at 16.5. I think, Boston College went into Florida State, and I'm not saying Florida State's a bad team. They are not. Florida State's a good team, and they went in and pretty much controlled that game, had an 18-13 first down edge. I think you're going to see Florida State play better as the season goes on. So watch out for this Boston College team here. I think they keep it a lot closer than expected. I like BC plus the points in this one.
Well, let's go ahead and hop into the Big 12, and it's a rematch from the Guaranteed Rate Bowl last year, Kansas and UNLV. The Running Rebs have already beaten one Big 12 team in Houston. Can they make it a second? We'll see. Kansas obviously coming off the disappointing loss last week to Illinois. It was a shootout last year in the bowl game, Phil, and Kansas didn't even have Jalen Daniels for that one. They had Jason Bean. How do you see this one shaking out? Do you feel like it's another high-scoring shootout?
Yeah, I think it probably will be on the higher scoring side. Like you said, in the bowl game last year, 49-36. And it seemed like every time some team took momentum, the other one came back. And it was a pretty fun game. UNLV, though, has impressed me, and they are an outstanding and amazing, actually, away dog. UNLV has actually covered 13 in a row as an away dog. Earlier in the year, they were an away dog against Houston, pulled the upset, even though I called for UNLV to win that one outright. And now they're here against Kansas. I love, Matthew Sluka is hitting a low percentage of his passes. He's a dangerous runner. He's leading the team in running, but I think he's going to improve as the season goes on. And the defense has been playing better. With Kansas, I think they're a good team. They're at home. They should probably come out with the win, but the spread just came over a touchdown. It's up to 7.5. And my average game grades actually have UNLV playing at 114 level so far this year. Kansas only 107. So my average game grades is actually calling for the upset. So I'm going to take the 7.5 points. A fun game to watch. I think it will be on the higher scoring side, and I'll take UNLV plus the points.
Interesting matchup, Phil, with Arizona heading into the Little Apple to take on K-State. You've got an Arizona team that defensively struggled mightily in its opener against New Mexico. Looked disjointed last week against Northern Arizona, struggling in the first half before finally separating in the second half. Noah Fafita didn't look as sharp as you might expect. Is this the game that Avery Johnson, highly touted quarterback for Kansas State, he's been efficient through 2 games, helped them, down the stretch against Tulane, pull that thing out, but he hasn't been dynamic. Is this the game, after hearing about Noah Fafita in this matchup all week, that Avery Johnson just says enough's enough? And is this his coming out party? What do you see playing out with Arizona's trip Friday night to Kansas State?
Yeah, I do think Kansas State's a better team, and they're a much better team at home than they are on the road. Now, last week, they probably should have lost to Tulane. They trailed 20-10 at the half. They got a fumble return for a touchdown, which was huge. Got outgained by 95 yards by Tulane. But as mentioned, they're a much better team at home. And maybe they were looking ahead to this one. I know it's a technically a non-conference game, but it's a conference opponent. You're at home. You're going to be fired up for it, especially an Arizona team that finished in the top 10 last year. And as you mentioned, so far this year, Arizona, 27-24 against New Mexico at the half. Northern Arizona, they actually trailed 10-6 at the half. You wonder a little bit about them. You look at Torrey McMillan at wide receiver, had over 300 yards in the opener, but last week, only 2 catches for McMillan for 11 yards. I do think K-State's a better team. I like K-State to win this one at home by about 10 points.
Bill, this is a sneaky good one. It's Cincinnati at Miami, Ohio. Miami won this game last year, and there was a lot of concern with the Bearcats a year ago when they dropped that game. It was kind of a little bit of a precursor for what would end up happening. Cincinnati, they blew a big lead last week against Pitt. Miami, on the other hand, they've played in a couple of rock fights against App State, Northwestern, 13-6, 13-9. The offense has struggled, but the defense has showed up and played well. Does Cincinnati get their revenge in 2024?
Yeah, and this is a Cincinnati team that in this series had won like the previous 16 games straight up in the series. They had dominated the series. And then last year, as you mentioned, they lost, but in that game, they had a big yardage edge, 478 to 183. They had a 25-12 first down edge and actually just came up short on the scoreboard somehow. So I think this a Cincinnati team that is better than Miami. They had won so many in a row, and now here they are, just a slight favorite on the road, playing with legitimate revenge. And if you watch that Cincinnati Pittsburgh game last week, it was all Cincinnati through 3 quarters, 27-6. Then it looked like the defense sort of was playing bend, don't break, let's not allow the quick score, and it came back to bite them. Pitt actually came back and beat them 28-27. So this is a game where I think I like Cincinnati to get their revenge. I think they're the better team, 16-1 straight up in the series. Last year, as mentioned, a 538 to 358 yard edge, 30-16 first downs. I'm going to take the Bearcats to get the revenge on the road here.
BYU, Phil, 2-0. Hats off to Kalani Sitake. They won a defensive rock fight last week on the road at SMU. They march into Laramie to take on Wyoming, a Wyoming team that struggled mightily through 2 games, got their doors blown off against Arizona State in the opener, lost to FCS Idaho last week. But strange things have been known to happen up in the mountains at War Memorial Stadium. Last year, Texas Tech marches into the opener and gets knocked off. BYU's laying a pretty big number, double-digit favorite heading into Laramie, War Memorial Stadium. What do you see playing out? Do you think BYU can cover here, or do they march on cleanly to go 3-0?
I think BYU does win the game. I think they're a stronger team. I like Retzlaff at QB, Rapati, Martin. Well, the top two running backs are actually both out for BYU. That's a little bit of a concern. And I don't think Wyoming can't be as bad as they've looked. I mean, the Arizona State game, they were just flat out awful. They were down 48-0. I think they went 60 yards for a touchdown at the end of the game in the final seconds to finish with 118 yards offense. Now, they did lose to Idaho last week, but I do want to point out Idaho gave Oregon a pretty good game 2 weeks ago. So this might be a better Idaho team than you think, and they did have a 270 to 225 yard edge. Now, when I talked to Coach Savell, he was extremely high on Evan Svoboda, said he's going to be an NFL draft pick, but he sure hasn't looked like it so far, hitting just 41% with a 1-2 ratio. I think this is a circle the wagons game for Wyoming. They're at home. They've been playing the first 2 games of the season without their top running back, Harrison Whaley. There's a potential that Whaley could return here with BYU down their top 2 running backs. I'm going to take Wyoming plus the points in this one.
Oklahoma State and Tulsa. Oklahoma State's been tested in these first couple of weeks, at least had good competition with South Dakota State, a strong FCS team, and then going to double OT last week against Arkansas, pulling out the win. They've won 9 straight here against Tulsa, who's coming off a loss to Arkansas State. Does this feel like there's any chance here, Phil, of Tulsa hanging around and keeping this a game late in the second half?
Well, Oklahoma State's very fortunate to have won last week. You watch that first half,
Yeah.
Arkansas had a 351 to 77 yard edge. And on one drive, they're driving. They're in Oklahoma State territory. It could have been 28-0 at the half. They get a 74-yard interception return for a touchdown, a 14-point swing, and that was the play of the game. It kept Oklahoma State in the game. Instead of being down 28-0 with no hope of winning, they were only down 21-7 at the half. We were able to mount that comeback, but as it was, they were still outgained 648 to 385. But we saw Oklahoma State struggle last year at times, and then they would bounce back. I think this is a bounce back game. The game's in Tulsa, so you think, oh, okay, you're on the road. Not really. Oklahoma State's going to have the crowd edge here. I remember watching the Oklahoma-Tulsa game last year. I used Oklahoma in that one, and Oklahoma clearly, it was like a home game for the Sooners. It'll be like a home game here for the Oklahoma State team. So I think Oklahoma State moves to 3-0, continues their domination of Tulsa, and I actually like them to win by more than the spread in this one.
Phil, Colorado at Colorado State. Colorado State, it almost feels through 2 games, we don't know much more about them than we did a month ago. They got their doors blown off at Texas, as you would expect. They won by 3 touchdowns against Northern Colorado, as you would expect. They're hosting a Colorado team that's teetering on turmoil. They had no answers against Nebraska. They barely survived FCS juggernaut North Dakota State in the opener. They won't even attempt to run the football to help that offensive line out. I mean, there's an element of stubbornness to this, it almost appears, but based on talent alone, they're giving 7 on the road at Colorado State. What do you see playing out in this quirky, interesting game?
Last week there was a game, ULM was playing UAB, and ULM's coaching staff had been let go by UAB after being there for years. And it was a game that when I talked to Coach Vincent in the offseason, he was pointing to that one the entire year. That was their Super Bowl game. And as it was, ULM shocked UAB. And I think the same thing applies here. For Colorado, it's tough to get up for Colorado State. But for Colorado State, there is no toughness getting up. And you can just go back to last year's game. Colorado State went into Colorado, a 3-touchdown underdog. Colorado was the toast of college football, and Colorado State just dominated that game. They had a 262 to 85 yard edge at the half. They led by 10 points in the fourth quarter and then ended up losing it in overtime. So Colorado State knows they can play with Colorado. They've been looking ahead to this game all season long. Meanwhile, Colorado's coming off that big game against Nebraska, and they've got Baylor at home on deck, their Big 12 opener. So it's not a big game for Colorado. It is a huge game for Colorado State. And I think we're going to see a replay of last year where Colorado State actually outplayed them. So I'm going to call for Colorado State plus the points in a potential upset here.
A big game in Fort Worth as UCF heads to TCU. And Phil, I've been saying this all offseason and through the first 2 weeks. I don't understand all this hype around UCF. I know they are much better than what they were a year ago, and they had a pretty decent first year in the Big 12. I just think there's way too much optimism on that team. I don't see them as a dark horse contender in the Big 12. Maybe I'm crazy, but doesn't it feel like this should be where a game where TCU should be the favorite rather than UCF on the road?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised UCF is a favorite. I think TCU actually opened up a slight favorite, and I quickly got bet to UCF being the favorite. But I think these are two play-on teams. The value is clearly with TCU. I do think UCF has got a lot of talent. You look at their running back core with R.J. Harvey, Penny Boone, Montgomery. KJ Jefferson hasn't recaptured his 2022 form yet, but they're playing solid defense. They brought in a ton of transfers. I do think they're a vastly improved team, but I like TCU at home. They should be the favorite. I agree with you 100% there. I had TCU about a 3 to 4 point favorite, so I love the fact they're a home dog. Josh Hoover's at quarterback, hitting 71% with a 4-0 ratio, and TCU is a team that just 2 years ago was playing in the national title game. They won all the close games that year. Last year, they lost all the close games. I think they're going to be back to winning all the close games this year. They were better than the final score against Stanford, a game they had a 457 to 281 yard edge. So I like TCU plus the points at home, and I'll agree with you 100%. I think they should be the favorite here.
Finally, Phil, drum roll, please, as we head into the 107th Backyard Brawl. So many different interesting storylines in this game as West Virginia heads to Pittsburgh as a 2-point favorite against the Pitt Panthers. You've got a West Virginia team with a quarterback in Garrett Green that really hasn't been uncorked against Pitt the last 2 years. A couple years ago, JT Daniels was the starter. Last year, of course, Garrett, a handful of snaps into the game, got hurt. You've seen a lot of C.J. Donaldson against Pitt, but his running mate in Jaheim White wasn't discovered really until later in the season last year as the X factor. So haven't seen him against Pitt. Meanwhile, on the other side, new Pitt offense, new Pitt quarterback, new Pitt coordinator. It almost feels like the apocalypse is upon us as I watch Pat Narduzzi's team with a up-tempo, no-huddle offense. What do you see playing out with West Virginia's trip to take on these Panthers in Pittsburgh Saturday afternoon?
I think it's going to be a great game to watch. I'll tell you that much. My favorite play in this game, and I have a clear play on it, it is over. I mean, Pitt is a team that for years has been based on defense and run game and have the offense run slow. They are clearly operating at a fast pace. Eli Holstein's an Alabama transfer, is hitting 67% with a 6-2 ratio. Desmond Reed comes over from West Carolina where he knows the offense extremely well. This guy's been electric. 293 yards rushing, almost 9 yards a carry, 117 yards receiving. He's a threat anytime he touches the ball. I think Pitt's going to put points up on the board, but last week Cincinnati just destroyed their defense. They had 285 yards at the half, led that thing 27-3 until Pitt had the late comeback. And same thing, last week I had a best bet on West Virginia minus the points against Albany. I was sweating that damn thing out. Albany kept moving all over. 306 yards passing in that game. And 374 yards offense. And it seemed there was a couple of times they got near the goal line where I was biting my nails because it was close. So I think both teams' defenses are susceptible. I think both teams' offenses, as you mentioned, Garrett Green, C.J. Danielson, Jaheim White, both teams' offenses are explosive. So I'm calling for over. I think it's 64. I think that it clearly will go over the total. Down to the wire, last play of the game type of thing.
Oh, man. So somebody's going to lose a few years off their life in this game. And that's usually how it is in this backyard brawl. Phil, one more for you. With this game, I mean, obviously West Virginia, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things because you can find a way to get to the college football playoff now with 12 teams in it. If you win the Big 12 or maybe even you just get to the Big 12 championship game, you have a chance. But just looking at kind of what sets up on the schedule for them, they have a gauntlet that they're going to have to go through in those first 5 games of conference play. How important, how key is this game for West Virginia to win instead of falling to 1 and 2 before they open up into that gauntlet?
Yeah, confidence-wise, I think it's key. But as you pointed out, it really doesn't matter if you win the Big 12, you're in a playoff automatically. So really what matters is those games against Kansas, which I think is very winnable. Oklahoma State, Oklahoma State looked vulnerable this past week. They get Iowa State and Kansas State at home. And then at Arizona, I think the schedule, while tough, is manageable. So I don't think it's a must-have for the season. The Big 12 title would get you into the playoff as it is. But I think it's an important game for both teams, clearly. And as far as confidence level goes, it's huge.
Well, Phil, we appreciate you once again. Look forward to talking to you again next week. And hopefully, we'll be talking about a backyard brawl victory for the Mountaineers. Get your popcorn ready, as Phil likes to always say. And we'll talk to you next week. Appreciate it.
Yeah, a lot of fun, guys, as always. Have fun this weekend at the game.
Phil Steele, everybody. And we will be back to put a bow on this show here in just a minute. We'll be right back.
There are better-known tractors in the world than Coyote. Ones with bigger names, longer histories, more popular hats, cute toy lines. But there's not a single tractor ever been built that's better equipped to do the dirty work. So we'll just focus on what really matters. Coyote, we dig dirt.
Get 0% financing for up to 84 months with approved credit on select Coyote tractors in stock now at Johnston Equipment. Route 33 between Weston and Buchanan.
And back in the gun here with Jed running the signal caller. No, Phil didn't necessarily give us his prediction in the backyard brawl, but he did say to play the over. I think he was being kind to us there to maybe not get us into our feelings heading into the brawl, but we'll see. But first, before we dive into anything more, a shout out to the newest sponsor of our show, Johnston Equipment. Get 0% financing for up to 84 months with approved credit on select Coyote tractors in stock now at Johnston Equipment, Route 33 between Weston and Buchanan. Jed, thoughts on Phil's thoughts about the backyard brawl? I think we kind of both agree that it's going to get a little bit into a back and forth type of affair. But who knows what will happen when the things kick off on Saturday.
Yeah, all indications, as we talked about earlier this week in the preview, as you heard Phil touch on, all indications would suggest or point to an abundance of points. And the over does seem like a good hedge here. And sometimes the football gods don't like things being obvious. So who knows? Is this one of those circumstances where things seem so obvious that they're like not so fast and they pump the brakes and turn this into something that you don't see coming at all? But I agree. Phil was comfortable in taking the over, but he didn't seem comfortable in taking the line one way or the other. Of course, West Virginia is only a 2-point favorite. But I mean, who knows? But I will say this too. We talked earlier about go to the Twitter page and take part in the weekly Big 12 picks. Well, there's a weekly wrinkle that we add when you populate that and make your picks. This week's wrinkle is one of the things we ask you to do when you make your picks is to describe your hatred for Pitt in a family-friendly way. And we already have some interesting responses. So once again, we encourage you to jump over to our Twitter account at In the Gun Podcast and take part in your picks and tell us to describe to us what your hatred for Pitt might be, because we all have our own version of it. But yeah, it was once again fun with Phil. He called for South Carolina to pull the upset. He always has a few surprises in him, but pay attention because his track record is pretty solid.
Oh yeah, for sure. The South Carolina one did get me. But yeah, it's going to be a fun Saturday. If you're a little bit nervous or weary about this game, the one thing that I would tell you to keep in mind is Garrett Green is your quarterback, and he didn't play in this game a year ago, essentially. And this is one that he really, really, really wanted to play in. And when you have somebody like that, that's a clear leader, he's feisty, he's tough, he's gritty. It's everything you want in a Mountaineer quarterback. So I think you got to feel good about that, knowing that going into the game.
Yeah, I said in the preview or earlier in the week in one of the episodes that I remember in the second quarter when I talked to Garrett, he came back out in street clothes, and it was very apparent that the injury was going to shelf him for a while. And he told me he was just beside himself. And he's like, of all games, why this game? I'd rather miss 4 other games than miss this one. So, yeah, don't make any mistake about it. This game means as much to our starting quarterbacks as you would hope and think it would. He desperately wants to play in this football game. He appreciates and understands the value of this rivalry, and he understands what it would mean for this team to go into Pittsburgh and find a way to beat our rival in this environment.
Absolutely. So make sure you do take part in that poll to see if you can beat the beer truck, Wes, the signal caller, and myself. And also go back and rewatch some of this week's episode. We had Big Daddy on for the first time. He made his debut. He talked about the light show. Really cool insight there in terms of all that stuff. We talked about our Big 12, or excuse me, our Pitt and West Virginia preview. Jed did a phenomenal dive on that, so make sure you follow and subscribe to us at In the Gun Podcast. And as always, be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. You've been In the Gun.
ITG.
The fun doesn't have to stop here.
Be sure to hit subscribe and never miss an episode.
If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback,
be sure to follow us on X at In the Gun Podcast.
Join us again next time.
Until then,
tell an ear to tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast.
This mission is over. It's over.